Skyrim is filled with towns that feel alive. Busy markets, warm inns, places where people gather and life moves forward. You walk in, hear conversations, see routines, and it all feels grounded. But not every town gives you that feeling. Some places feel off. At first, it's subtle. The buildings look the same, the layout feels familiar, and nothing immediately stands out. But then you start to notice the small things. The way people speak, the lack of movement, the strange tension in the air that doesn't quite go away. It's not danger, not in the obvious sense. It's something quieter, a feeling that something isn't right beneath the surface, that there's more going on than what you're being shown. And the longer you stay, the more that feeling builds, turning simple moments into something uncomfortable. These are the towns that don't need chaos or conflict to stand out. They just need time. Morthal doesn't try to impress you when you first arrive. And that's exactly what makes it so unsettling. There's no grand entrance, no bustling market, no sense of energy or movement that defines so many other towns in Skyrim. Instead, you're met with silence. Not complete silence, but the kind that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on everything around you. The marsh stretches out in every direction, grey and lifeless with fog that never quite lifts. The buildings feel worn, almost forgotten, and the people don't feel entirely present. It's as if Morthal exists slightly removed from the rest of Skyrim, disconnected in a way that goes beyond geography. What makes Morthal so effective as an unsettling location isn't any one dramatic event, it's the atmosphere. From the moment you step into the town, there's a sense that something is wrong. Even if you can't immediately explain why, the environment plays a huge role in this. The swamp surrounding Morthal isn't just visually bleak, it's oppressive. The muted colours, the constant haze, the lack of clear visibility all contribute to a feeling of uncertainty. You can't see far, you can't fully orient yourself, and that lack of clarity seeps into how the town feels as a whole. Unlike places like Whiterun or Solitude, where the layout is open and quite easy to navigate, Morthal feels closed in despite being surrounded by open land. The swamp doesn't feel like space, it feels like a barrier, something that isolates the town rather than connecting it to the world. And that isolation is reflected in the people who live there. The residents of Morthal don't behave in the same grounded, routine-driven way you see elsewhere. There's a distance to them, a kind of detachment that makes interactions feel slightly off. Conversations don't flow naturally, reactions feel muted or delayed. It's subtle but noticeable. The sense that everyone is carrying something beneath the surface, something they're not saying. And as you spend more time there, that feeling only deepens. Jarl Idgrod Ravencrone embodies this perfectly. She's one of the most unusual leaders in Skyrim, not because she's outwardly hostile or corrupt, but because she feels disconnected from reality in a way that's hard to define. She speaks about visions, about seeing things others can't, about understanding the swamp in ways that go beyond normal perception. And while that could easily be dismissed as eccentricity, the way it's presented doesn't feel exaggerated. It feels grounded, just enough to be believable. That's what makes it unsettling. You're never quite sure if she's wrong or if she's seeing something that you're not. And that uncertainty spreads to the rest of the town. Because if the person in charge operates on a different understanding of reality, what does that really mean for everyone else? It creates a quiet tension that never fully resolves. You don't feel safe, but you also don't feel directly threatened either. You're just aware that things aren't as straightforward as they seem. This feeling is reinforced by the central event tied to Morthal, the burned house, and the mystery surrounding it. On the surface, it's a tragedy, a home destroyed, a family lost. But the way the town reacts to it is what makes it stand out. There's hesitation, avoidance, a reluctance to fully acknowledge what happened. It's not just grief, it's discomfort. Like people know more than they're willing to say. And as you begin to investigate, that discomfort turns into something darker. The revelation of vampirism within the town doesn't come as a sudden shock. It feels like a confirmation of something that was already there. The unease you felt from the beginning starts to make sense. But it doesn't make things better. If anything, it makes Morthal feel even more unstable. Because now you know that the threat isn't external, it's embedded within the town itself. That's a key part of what makes Morthal so unsettling compared to other locations. In many places, danger comes from outside. Bandits, dragons, enemies you can identify and confront. In Morthal, the danger feels internal, hidden, integrated into the everyday life of the town. And even after resolving the quest, that doesn't fully go away. The town doesn't really transform, it doesn't become lively or welcoming, it stays quiet. And that persistence is important, because it suggests that the nature of Morthal isn't just tied to a single event. It's part of the place itself. The swamp, the people, the atmosphere, they all contribute to something that doesn't change easily. Even smaller details reinforce this. The lack of activity, the limited number of residents, the absence of the usual distractions you find in other towns. All of it creates a sense of emptiness. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like something is missing. Like there should be more, but there isn't. And that absence becomes its own presence. You notice what isn't there just as much as what is. There's also a strange stillness to Morthal that sets it apart. Time feels slower, not in a relaxing way, but in a way that makes every moment feel slightly stretched. Walking through the town doesn't feel like passing through. It feels like lingering, like you're staying longer than you intended. Even if you're just moving from one building to another, and the longer you stay, the more that initial unease settles into something more defined. Not fear exactly, but awareness. A sense that you're somewhere that doesn't fully align with the rest of Skyrim itself. That operates on slightly different roles, slightly different logic. And while nothing may happen in that moment, the potential for something to be wrong is always there. That's what makes Morthal stand out among Skyrim's towns. It doesn't rely on spectacle or obvious danger to create an impression. It uses restraint, atmosphere, subtle shifts in tone and behaviour that build over time rather than hitting you all at once. When you compare that to a place like Whiterun, the difference becomes immediately clear. Whiterun feels open, structured, and alive in a way that naturally puts you at ease. The city is elevated both physically and symbolically, sitting above the plains with clear visibility in every direction. You can see what's coming, you can understand the layout, and there's a constant sense of movement. Guards patrolling, merchants calling out, people going about their routines. Everything feels grounded and predictable. Morthal offers none of that. Where Whiterun is bright and exposed, Morthal is dim and obscured. The fog replaces clarity, the swamp replaces structure, and the sense of openness is traded for isolation. In Whiterun, you feel like part of a functioning system. In Morthal, you feel like an outsider stepping into something you don't fully understand. Even the leadership reflects this contrast. Bolgruff is direct, practical, and easy to read. His concerns are clear, his decisions grounded. Idgrod Ravencrone, on the other hand, speaks in visions and impressions, leaving you uncertain about what she truly knows. That difference alone shifts how each city feels to exist in. One stable and defined, the other unpredictable and vague. It's not just about safety, it's about certainty as well. Whiterun gives you that, Morthal quietly takes it away. It's not a place you visit for excitement, it's a place you remember because of how it made you feel. Uncertain, uncomfortable, slightly out of place. And even after you leave, that feeling lingers, because Morthal isn't unsettling in a way that resolves cleanly. There's no clear moment where everything makes sense, no definitive point where the tension disappears. It stays with you, tied to the memory of that fog, that silence, that quiet sense that something just wasn't right. In a game full of dramatic locations and obvious threats, Morthal proves that you don't need chaos to create unease. Sometimes all it takes is a town that feels just slightly wrong, and never quite explains why. Dawnstar feels wrong in a way that's hard to shake, even before you understand why. On the surface, it's just another coastal town in Skyrim, cold, quiet, and shaped by the harsh environment around it. The Sea of Ghosts stretches endlessly beside it, grey and unforgiving, while snow blankets the ground in a way that dulls colour and sound alike. It should feel like a place defined by resilience, like Winterhold or Windhelm in its own way, but it doesn't. Instead, Dawnstar carries a kind of quiet exhaustion, as if the town itself is worn down by something it can't escape. And the longer you stay, the clearer it becomes that this isn't just about the cold or the isolation. It's about something far more unsettling, something that lingers beneath the surface and affects everyone who lives there. The first thing you notice is the mood. Dawnstar doesn't feel alive in the same way other towns do. There's movement, there are people going about their routines, but it all feels muted. Conversations lack energy, interactions feel strained, and there's a shared sense of unease that runs through almost every character you speak to. It's not panic or fear in the traditional sense. It's fatigue, a kind of collective weariness that suggests something has been wrong for a long time. And that feeling is reinforced almost immediately by the town's central issue, the nightmares. Unlike many of Skyrim's problems, which are external and visible, Dawnstar's struggle is internal. The townspeople aren't being attacked by bandits or threatened by dragons. They're being worn down in their sleep. Night after night, they experience the same reoccurring nightmares, leaving them restless, irritable, and increasingly desperate. It's a threat that doesn't leave physical marks, but the impact is undeniable. People are tired, frustrated, on the edge. And there's no clear escape from it. That's what makes it so unsettling. Sleep is supposed to be a refuge, a moment of peace between the dangers of the world. In Dawnstar, that refuge has been taken away. The one place where people should feel safe has been compromised. And because of that, the entire town feels unstable, not in a chaotic way, but in a way that suggests something fundamental has been disrupted. You can see it in how people talk. They're short with each other, dismissive, irritated in ways that feel deeper than simple frustration. It's as if the lack of rest is slowly eroding the structure of the town itself. Relationships feel strained, patience is thin, and there's a sense that things could unravel if the situation continues long enough. When you begin to investigate, the cause of these nightmares reveals itself to be tied to Vermina, the Daedric prince of dreams and nightmares. And that revelation doesn't bring relief at all, it deepens that unease. Because unlike many Daedric influences in Skyrim, which manifest through physical artifacts or direct confrontation, Vermina's presence is intangible. She doesn't need to appear openly. She doesn't need to threaten the town in a visible way. She's already inside it. That idea alone shifts how Dawnstar feels. The threat isn't something you can see or fight in the streets. It's something that exists in a space you can't fully access. And even when you enter Nightcaller Temple to confront the source, the experience reinforces the sense of disconnection. The use of dreams, memories, and altered states of perception blurs the line between what's real and what isn't. And when you return to Dawnstar, that line doesn't fully settle back into place. Because even though the quest provides a resolution, the feeling of intrusion doesn't completely disappear. The knowledge that something could reach into people's minds, control their experiences, and reshape their perception of reality lingers. It changes how you see the town, not just as a place that was affected, but as a place that can be affected in ways that aren't immediately visible. That's a different kind of unease than what you find in places like Morthal. Morthal feels wrong because of its atmosphere, its isolation, its quiet tension. Dawnstar feels wrong because of what's happening beneath the surface. Because of the idea that the people there are not fully in control of their own thoughts. And that idea is hard to shake. Even outside of the Nightmare questline, Dawnstar carries a sense of incompleteness. It's a smaller town, lacking the structure and variety of larger cities. There are fewer distractions, fewer places to go, fewer things to anchor your experience. That emptiness amplifies everything else. There's less to pull your attention away from the underlying tension, less to break up the monotony of the environment. And obviously, the cold doesn't help either. Unlike the dramatic snowstorms of other regions, Dawnstar's environment feels flat and persistent. The snow isn't dynamic, it's constant. The sky often feels overcast, the lighting muted, and the overall tone subdued. It creates a visual consistency that borders on stagnation, reinforcing the idea that nothing here really changes. And that sense of repetition isn't just environmental, it's reflected in the people who live there, each of them carrying a different piece of the town's unease. The Jarl is one of the clearest examples of how deeply the nightmares affected Dawnstar. He's already a rigid and uncompromising leader, but the lack of sleep pushes him further into instability. His dialogue feels sharper, more erratic, less grounded than it should be for someone in his position. There's a sense that his judgment is slipping, and the constant exhaustion is eroding whatever stability he once had. And because he's the Jarl, that instability doesn't stay contained. It influences the entire town. Leadership in Skyrim is often a source of structure, something that keeps a settlement grounded even in difficult times. In Dawnstar, that structure feels weakened. Skald isn't just tired, he feels like someone being slowly worn down, and there's no clear point where that decline stops. Then there's Erendar, who introduces a completely different layer to the town's identity. Unlike the others, he understands what's happening, at least to an extent. As a former priest of Vermina, he has a direct connection to the force causing the nightmares, and that connection changes how he carries himself. There's guilt there, but also urgency. He doesn't speak like someone guessing at the problem. He speaks like someone who's seen it before and knows how dangerous it can become. That makes him feel out of place in Dawnstar in a very specific way. While the rest of the town is confused and exhausted, Erendar is focused, driven by something deeper. But that clarity doesn't bring comfort. It reinforces the seriousness of the situation. If someone like him is concerned, then whatever is happening isn't just unusual, it's significant. There's also Arundel, who isn't physically present in Dawnstar anymore, but whose connection to it adds one of the darkest undertones in the entire region. Banished from the town and now residing in Ljungvild, his story reflects a different kind of corruption, one that isn't tied to dreams, but to obsession and decay. The fact that someone like Arundel came from Dawnstar, that his story branches out from this already unsettling place, adds to the sense that something about the area itself fosters instability. His actions in Ljungvild are extreme, disturbing, and completely detached from normal behaviour. And while he's no longer part of the town, his origin ties that darkness back to it. It suggests that unease in Dawnstar isn't isolated to the present moment. It has roots that extend outward, influencing events and people beyond its borders. When you compare that to Morthal, the difference in how each town creates unease becomes much clearer. Morthal's discomfort is environmental. It surrounds you the moment you arrive. The fog, the swamp, the silence, the strange behaviour of its people. It all works together to create a feeling that something is off, even before you understand why. It's immediate, almost instinctive. Dawnstar, on the other hand, builds its unease more gradually. At first, it just feels tired, worn down by cold and isolation. But the longer you stay, the more that surface-level exhaustion reveals something deeper. Morthal feels distant, like it exists slightly outside the rest of Skyrim. Dawnstar feels connected, but infected. The problem isn't that it's cut off from the world, it's that something has taken hold within it. In Morthal, the danger feels hidden in the environment and the unknown. In Dawnstar, it's inside the people themselves, shaping how they think, how they act, and how they experience reality. That's what separates them both. Morthal makes you uneasy because of where you are. Dawnstar makes you uneasy because of what's happening, and the fact that it's happening somewhere it shouldn't. Together, Dawnstar and the characters within it create a layered sense of discomfort. It's not just that the town is affected by nightmares, it's that different people are responding to that pressure in different, increasingly unstable ways. Leadership falters, past connections resurface, and darker history begin to feel more relevant. Dawnstar doesn't just feel tired, it feels like it's slowly unravelling. And that ties back into everything else, because just like the environment, the tension repeats over and over again. There's no variation, no progression, just the same underlying unease, expressed through different people, different moments, different conversations. That repetition becomes part of the town's identity. It's not just something that happens, it's something that defines how Dawnstar feels. And that's really what makes Dawnstar so unsettling. It's not loud, it's not chaotic, it doesn't confront you with obvious danger. Instead, it creates a persistent sense that something is wrong in a way you can't fully control or escape. The people feel it even if they don't understand it. The environment reflects it even if it doesn't really explain it. And as a player, you experience it not through sudden events, but through accumulation, small details, repeated interactions, a tone that never quite lifts. It's the kind of place where relief doesn't come from solving a problem, because even when the problem is gone, the feeling remains. That lingering unease is what sets Dawnstar apart. It doesn't rely on a single moment or revelation to create impact. It builds slowly through atmosphere, through implication, through the idea that the mind itself can become a battleground. And once that idea takes hold, it changes how you see everything else. Because if something can't reach you there, then nowhere ever feels completely safe. Roekstead is one of those places in Skyrim that doesn't immediately announce itself as unsettling. And that's exactly why it works. On the surface, it's calm, quiet, even welcoming in a way that feels almost out of place in a province defined by conflict and harsh environments. Golden fields stretch out around it, crops grow in abundance, and the town itself feels stable in a way that nearby regions often aren't. It's small, simple, and seemingly untouched by the chaos that affects so much of Skyrim. But the longer you stay, the more that calm starts to feel unnatural. Not peaceful, but just unnatural. Because in a land where farming is difficult, where weather is unpredictable, and where most settlements struggle to sustain themselves, Roekstead doesn't just survive, it thrives. And that's where the unease begins. The first thing that stands out is the land itself. Roekstead shouldn't be as fertile as it is. The surrounding region isn't known for rich farmland, and yet the crops here grow consistently, reliably, almost effortlessly. There's no visible struggle, no signs of the hardship that usually comes with agriculture in Skyrim. Everything just works. And while that might sound like a success story on paper, in the context of the world it feels off. Because nothing in Skyrim comes that easily. That sense of something being too good lingers as you interact with the people who live there. Rorik, the town's founder, is at the centre of it all. He's presented as a former soldier who carved out a life for himself after years of conflict. Someone who turned a barren piece of land into a thriving farm through determination and effort. It's a straightforward story, one that fits neatly into Skyrim's broader themes of resilience and survival. But like everything else in Roekstead, there's a subtle tension beneath it. The story is almost too clean, too simple. It explains the outcome, but not the process in a way that feels entirely convincing. And that's where the questions start to form. Because Roek isn't the only one tied to the land's success. There are hints, small, easily overlooked details that suggest something else might be at play. Manette, for example, stands out immediately. He's not a farmer, not a labourer, not someone who fits naturally into the rhythm of a small agriculture town. He's a Breton with knowledge of magic, and his presence in Roekstead feels deliberate. More importantly, his dialogue and associations hint at something deeper, something tied to rituals, to knowledge that doesn't quite align with simple farming. It's never stated outright, but it doesn't need to be. The implication is enough. That implication that something unnatural might be sustaining Roekstead transforms how the entire town feels. The Golden Fields stop looking like a success story and start looking like a result. The prosperity stops feeling earned and starts feeling arranged. And once that idea takes hold, it's hard to see the town in the same way again. The NPCs reinforce this feeling in subtle but important ways. There's a lack of curiosity, a lack of questioning about why things are the way they are. People accept the prosperity as normal, even though it stands in contrast to the rest of Skyrim. That acceptance creates a kind of quiet tension. It's not that the townspeople are hiding something, they just don't seem to ask the questions that feel obvious to an outsider. And that in itself is unsettling, because it suggests either ignorance or complicity. Eric the Slayer, my follower, adds another layer to this. He's one of the more memorable NPCs in the town, dreaming of adventure, wanting to leave Roekstead and experience the wider world. On the surface, he represents a familiar archetype, the young dreamer looking beyond his small beginnings. But in the context of Roekstead, his desire to leave feels different. It feels like an instinct, a pull away from something he doesn't fully understand. His father's reluctance to let him go can be read as concern, but it also reinforces the idea that Roekstead is a place where people don't easily leave. Not because they can't, but because something keeps them there. Even the children in Roekstead contribute to that unease. There are subtle implications again, never fully confirmed, that something about the town affects them differently. Dialogue hints at strange patterns, at behaviours that don't quite align with what you'd expect. It's never explicit, never fully explained, but it adds to the growing sense that Roekstead isn't just a normal settlement with good soil. It's something else. And that something else is what defines the town's unsettling nature. Because when you start pulling together all the scattered hints, small inconsistencies, and bits of dialogue, Roekstead begins to feel less like a simple farming village, and more like something carefully constructed, something sustained by forces that aren't openly acknowledged. One of the most widely discussed interpretations is the idea of a Daedric bargain, most often tied to Clavicus Vile. The logic behind it is simple but effective. Roekstead's success is too consistent, too reliable to be natural. In a province where even the most established farms struggle against the elements, this one settlement somehow produces perfect results year after year. That kind of stability doesn't just happen, and in Skyrim, when something feels too perfect, Daedric influence is never far behind. Ideal for prosperity, crops that never fail, land that always provides, would fit perfectly within Clavicus Vile's sphere of influence. But like all Daedric bargains, it wouldn't come without a cost. And that's where the darker theories begin to take shape. One of the most disturbing ideas surrounding Roekstead is the possibility of sacrifice, specifically the suggestion that the town's prosperity is maintained through the loss of women or children. It sounds extreme at first, but there are small, uncomfortable details that keep the idea from being dismissed entirely. There's an unusually high number of widowers in the town, men who speak of deceased wives with a kind of quiet finality. Lemkill in particular stands out, not just because he's harsh, but because of how openly he expresses disdain towards his daughters. It's not just frustration, it feels deeper, colder, more unsettling. When you place that behaviour alongside the broader pattern of missing or absent women, it starts to form a question that the game never directly answers. Where did they actually go? Nothing confirms this theory outright, but nothing fully dismisses it either, and that ambiguity is what gives it weight. Then there's Yuan Minette, whose role becomes increasingly suspicious the more you look at it. Officially, he's just a healer, someone who tends to the people and supports the community. But his background in magic, combined with his presence in a town that otherwise revolves around farming, raises questions. Why is he there? What exactly is he doing beyond basic healing? Dialogue from Sissel suggests that he may be teaching her magic in secret, which on its own isn't inherently sinister, but in the context of everything else, it adds another layer of unease. If Yuan is connected to the land's fertility, if he's maintaining it through magical means, then what kind of magic is he using? Restoration doesn't explain thriving crops. And if it's something more, then where did he learn it? That question ties back into Roek himself, because his story doesn't fully line up either. He claims to have founded Roekstead after the Great War, presenting himself as a soldier who turned to farming and built something new from nothing. It's a clean, believable narrative, but it's not entirely supported by in-game lore. References like holdings of Jarl Jarlund suggests that Roekstead existed long before Roek arrived, which introduces a contradiction. If the town is older than he claims, then what exactly did he find, and why present the story that way? It creates the possibility that Roek isn't just a farmer who got lucky, but someone who stepped into something that was already there and continued it. When you put all of these elements together, the unnatural fertility, the presence of a magically inclined outsider, the inconsistencies in Roek's story, the strange patterns among the townspeople, you don't get a single clear answer. You get a framework, a collection of possibilities that all point in the same direction, even if none of them are confirmed outright. And that's what makes it so effective, because the game never tells you what Roekstead is. It lets you decide what it might be. And depending on how you interpret that evidence, that answer can become increasingly disturbing. Unlike Morthal, where the atmosphere immediately signals that something is wrong, Or Dawnstar, where the problem becomes clear through nightmares. Roekstead hides its unease behind anomalacy. It presents itself as stable, successful, even ideal. But that presentation feels increasingly fragile the more you look at it. Because the more you question it, the less it holds up under scrutiny. Why is the land so fertile? Why is someone like Yuan there? Why does everything feel so controlled, so consistent? And why does no one seem to question it? These questions don't have clear answers, and they might never get them. And that's part of what makes Roekstead so effective. The game never confirms anything directly. It leaves you with fragments, with hints, with connections that you have to piece together yourself. And depending on how you interpret those pieces, the town can feel anywhere from slightly unusual to deeply disturbing. Once all these possibilities exists, it changes everything, because now every golden field becomes a suspect. Every successful harvest feels like it might have a hidden price. Every smiling NPC feels like they might be part of something they don't fully understand or something they've chosen not to question. That's a very different kind of unease than what you find in other towns. It's not about danger, it's about doubt. Roekstead doesn't threaten you directly, it doesn't present an immediate problem to solve. It simply exists, quietly, confidently, as if everything is exactly as it should be. And that confidence is what makes it so unsettling, because it leaves no room for obvious cracks, only subtle ones that you have to notice yourself. Even the environment plays into this, the open fields, the clear skies, the warm tones. They all contrast sharply within the darker, harsher regions of Skyrim. It feels like a place that should be safe, should be comfortable, but that contrast ends up amplifying the unease rather than reducing it, because it feels like an exception to the rules of the world, and exceptions always raise questions. The longer you stay in Roekstead, the more that initial sense of calm gives way to something else. Not fear, not tension in the traditional sense, but a lingering uncertainty, a feeling that there's more beneath the surface, more than you're being shown, more than the game is willing to confirm. And that's what makes it so memorable, because it doesn't resolve. There's no quest that fully explains the town, no moment where everything is revealed and the mystery disappears. Roekstead remains what it is, a place that works, a place that thrives, a place that doesn't quite make sense. And that lack of resolution is what allows the unease to persist. Because without answers, the questions stay with you, long after you've left the town behind. In a world filled with dragons, Daedric priests, and obvious threats, Roekstead proves that sometimes the most unsettling places aren't the ones that confront you directly. They're the ones that seem perfectly fine, until you actually start thinking about them. Karth Wasten is one of those settlements in Skyrim that doesn't immediately present itself as unsettling, in the way places like Morthal, Dawnstar, or Roekstead do, but instead reveals its discomfort gradually through context, history, and implication. On the surface, it looks like a simple mining village, tucked away in the Reach, built around the extraction of silver from nearby cliffs, and sustained by hard labour in a harsh environment. The buildings are modest, the population very small, and the landscape around it is rugged and exposed, with the river cutting through the terrain and the rocky hills standing like silent observers over everything. At first glance, it might even seem peaceful in a rough frontier sort of way. Another example of Skyrim's scattered communities surviving through resilience and necessity. But the longer you think about Karth Wasten and the more you engage with what actually happens there, the more that initial impression dissolves into something far more uneasy. Because Karth Wasten is not just isolated, it is exposed. Not just small, it's vulnerable. Not just quiet, but historically shaped by violence, exploitation, and forces far larger than itself. All of which contribute to a lingering sense that the town is never truly stable, no matter how calm it appears in the moment. The most immediate and defining aspect of Karth Wasten is its isolation. Unlike major holds or even more established minor settlements, Karth Wasten exists on the edge of everything, geographically, politically, and socially. It is situated in the Reach, one of the most unstable and contested regions in Skyrim, an area defined by conflict between the Forsworn, the Empire, local miners, and various opportunistic factions. That alone places it in a precarious position. But Karth Wasten is even more exposed than most settlements in the region. There are no walls protecting it, no significant defensive structures, and no meaningful military presence stationed permanently within the village. It exists in basically open terrain, surrounded by cliffs and wilderness, meaning that any attack or intrusion doesn't need to breach defenses. It simply just arrives. And that lack of protection creates a constant underlying vulnerability. Even when nothing is happening, the layout of the town suggests that something could happen at any time, and there would be very little anyone could do to stop it. That vulnerability is not just theoretical. It is reinforced by the town's history of violence and conflict. Karth Waston has repeatedly been caught in the crossfire between local miners and Forsworn forces, with control of the silver mine being a recurring source of tension and bloodshed. The mine itself is central to the town's existence, providing both livelihood and reason for outsiders to care about it at all. But that dependence is precisely what makes it so unstable. Whoever controls the mine effectively controls the town's survival, which means Karth Waston is perpetually subject to pressure from groups far powerful than the villagers themselves. This dynamic transforms the settlement from a self-sustaining community into a resource node contested by larger forces. The residents are not fully in control of their own environment. They are participants in a cycle of exploitation and resistance that has repeated itself over time, leaving behind a sense of exhaustion and resignation that can be felt in how the town functions. When you speak to the NPCs in Karth Waston, that sense of weariness becomes more apparent. Characters like Thongvor Silverblood represent opposing interests tied to the mine, and the conflict between NPCs highlights how external power structures impose themselves onto the town's internal dynamics. Iron Thatch, as a local leader tied to the workers, represents the fragile attempt to maintain independence and stability within the settlement. Thongvor Silverblood, on the other hand, embodies the reach of powerful external influence, specifically Markarth's elite families, who see Karth Waston not as a community, but as an asset. The tension between these figures is not abstract. It plays out directly in the town, shaping relationships, decisions, and ultimately the safety of everyone living there. This creates a situation where the villagers are not simply living their lives. They are constantly navigating pressures imposed from above and around them, with little ability to truly escape or redefine their circumstances. That imbalance of power contributes heavily to the unsettling nature of Karth Waston. Unlike towns that feel internally cohesive, Karth Waston feels fractured by external influence. It does not belong fully to its inhabitants. It exists in a state of contested ownership, where different factions assert control or claim legitimacy, and the villagers are left trying to survive within these shifting boundaries. This creates a subtle but persistent sense of instability. Even when nothing violent is actively occurring, the memory of past conflicts and the expectation of future ones hangs over the settlement like a shadow that never fully lifts. The geography of Karth Waston reinforces this feeling in a very deliberate way. The open cliffs and narrow pathways make it visually striking, but also emphasise exposure. There is no sense of enclosure or safety. The mine sits prominently within the landscape, almost exposed rather than hidden, as if it's waiting to be noticed and taken. The river nearby provides a sense of movement and life, but it also cuts through the terrain in a way that feels like a boundary rather than a connection. Everything about the environment suggests separation rather than integration, reinforcing the idea that Karth Waston is not protected by its surroundings, but instead left vulnerable within them. What makes this especially unsettling compared to other towns in Skyrim is that this place lacks the comforting illusions that some settlements provide. In places like Whiterun, even though danger exists in the broader world, the city itself feels secure due to its walls, leadership, and organisation. In Dawnstar or Morthal, unease is tied to supernatural or environmental factors that are very clearly identifiable and eventually addressed. Even Roeksted's ambiguity is wrapped in pastoral calm that masks its strangeness. Karth Waston, however, offers no such buffer. Its problems are not hidden behind mystery or softened by structure. They are direct, political, and ongoing. There is no sense that things are being kept stable by design. Instead, stability feels temporary and easily disrupted. To go more in depth, That sense of vulnerability becomes even more pronounced when you look at one of the darkest events tied to the settlement, the so-called Karthwasten Massacre. Unlike many conflicts in Skyrim that are clearly defined with obvious sides and outcomes, this event is surrounded by uncertainty, conflicting accounts, and a lack of closure that only adds to the town's unsettling reputation. What is genuinely agreed upon is that during the chaos of the Stormcloak Rebellion, Karthwasten became the site of a brutal confrontation involving mercenaries. Beyond that, the details begin to fracture. Some accounts suggest that the Stormcloaks were responsible, using hired fighters to secure control of the mine and eliminate resistance. Others point towards the Forsworn, framing the attack as part of their ongoing struggle to reclaim territory in the Reach. Both explanations are plausible. Within the context of the region, both factions have a reason to target a place like this, and both have histories of violence tied to resource control and territorial dominance. But the fact that no single narrative is clearly established is what makes the event so unsettling. Because it means the truth is buried, and what's left behind it is just uncertainty. For the people of Karthwasten, that uncertainty becomes part of the town's identity. It's not just that violence occurred, it's that no one can fully agree on who caused it or why it unfolded the way it did. That lack of clarity prevents any real sense of resolution. There's no clear enemy to blame, no definitive version of events to move on from. Instead, the massacre lingers as kind of an open wound in the town's history, something acknowledged but never fully understood. It also reinforces how easily Karthwasten can be overtaken by larger forces. The involvement of mercenaries is particularly telling. It suggests that conflict wasn't just ideological or territorial, it was transactional. The town became a target not only because of its strategic importance, but because it could be bought. Violence wasn't just a byproduct of war, it was something organised, outsourced, and directed at a place that lacked the means to defend itself. That realisation shifts how you see Karthwasten entirely. It's not just vulnerable to attack, it's vulnerable to decision. To choices made elsewhere by people who may never even set foot in the town themselves. And once that idea takes hold, the settlement starts to feel less like a community and more like a point on the map. Something that can be claimed, contested, or erased depending on who decides it matters. The aftermath of the massacre doesn't offer closure either. There's no large-scale rebuilding effort, no significant shift in how the town protects itself. No visible change that suggests lessons were learned or systems improved. Instead, Karthwasten continues much as it always was, small, exposed, and dependent on the same fragile structures that allowed the violence to happen in the first place. Which makes the event feel less like a singular tragedy and more like a pattern, a warning that what happened once could happen again, and it did with the mine being taken over. And that lingering possibility is what gives Karthwasten its deepest sense of unease. The massacre isn't just part of its past, it's part of its present. It shapes how the town feels, even if it's not directly referenced in every interaction. It exists in the background, influencing perception, reinforcing the idea that this is a place where things can go wrong quickly, and without clear explanation. Even the aftermath of conflict in Karthwasten does not fully restore a sense of safety. Depending on player choices, the town can shift control or experience violence that leaves lasting effects on how it feels. But regardless of that outcome, the underlying vulnerability remains unchanged. The mine is still central, the geography is still exposed, the power dynamics are still unbalanced. Nothing fundamentally resolves the core issue that the town exists in a state of dependency on forces outside its control. This is what ultimately makes Karthwasten one of the most unsettling towns in Skyrim. Not because of supernatural horror or overt strangeness, but because of its realism. It reflects a kind of vulnerability that feels plausible within the world of Skyrim. A small community caught between larger powers, sustained by resources that make it vulnerable, but also dangerous to possess. It is a place defined not by what it is, but by what it's subject to. And that creates a lingering discomfort that doesn't rely on atmosphere alone, but on understanding. Because once you recognise how fragile Karthwasten really is, it becomes difficult to see it as just another quiet mining village. It starts to feel like a place waiting for the next conflict to arrive. There are towns in Skyrim that feel unsettling because something is happening. And then there are places like Kynes Grove, where the unsettling part is what already happened, and how little of it seems to matter anymore. You arrive, you look around, and nothing immediately stands out. A small mining settlement, a few scattered buildings, a working population just trying to get by. It feels ordinary, almost forgettable. But that's exactly what makes it so strange. Because Kynes Grove is a place that has experienced something massive, something that should have permanently changed it, and yet somehow it hasn't. Or at least not in the way you'd expect. Kynes Grove sits in Eastmarch, a region defined by volcanic activity, ash-filled skies, and an environment that feels harsh, even by Skyrim's standards. The ground itself looks unstable, dotted with steam vents and scorched earth, as if the land is constantly reminding you that it isn't entirely safe. It's not a place that invites settlement, it's a place that feels endured. And yet people still live here. They work the mines, go about their routines, and treat the environment as something normal. That alone creates a subtle tension, because when something dangerous becomes routine, it stops being acknowledged, even if the danger never actually goes away. But the real source of unease in Kynes Grove isn't just the land, it's the history tied to it, specifically the return of a dragon. Kynes Grove is one of the first places in Skyrim where you witness a dragon being resurrected. Not just encountered, not just fought, but brought back. You arrive alongside Delphine, watch as Alduin himself appears, and see a dead dragon rise from the ground, in a moment that fundamentally reshapes what dragons represent in the game. Up until that point, dragons are threats, but they are singular, isolated. In Kynes Grove, that understanding changes. They are no longer just enemies, they are part of something larger, something ongoing, something that can't be stopped as easily as you might have hoped. And all of that happens right there, in the middle of this small, otherwise unremarkable settlement. What makes this so unsettling isn't just the event itself, it's what comes after. Because once the dragon is defeated, once Alduin leaves, once the immediate threat is gone, Kynes Grove goes back to normal. The miners return to work, the town continues as if nothing truly changed. Life resumes in the shadow of something that should have redefined everything. And that disconnect is where the unease starts to settle in. Because how does a place experience something like that and just move on? The answer, or at least part of it, lies in the nature of Kynes Grove's people. This is not a town of heroes or scholars. It's a working settlement built around labour, routine and survival. The miners aren't there to question the nature of dragons or contemplate the implications of Alduin's return. They're there to work, to earn, to continue, and that focus creates a kind of emotional distance from what happened. But that distance doesn't make the event less significant. It makes the town feel disconnected from it. Like the scale of what occurred doesn't match the scale of how it's processed. That mismatch is what gives Kynes Grove its unique kind of unease. In other towns, major events leave visible marks, changes in dialogue, shifts in behaviour, a sense that something has happened that people are still reacting to. In Kynes Grove, the reaction feels muted, contained, almost absent. And that absence becomes noticeable, because you remember what happened there. You remember Alduin, you remember the resurrection, and yet the town doesn't reflect that memory in a way that feels proportionate. It creates a strange disconnect between player experience and world response. You've witnessed something monumental, something that signals the beginning of a much larger threat, and then you look around and the town feels unchanged. That lack of acknowledgement doesn't make the event less impactful, it makes the town feel more unsettling, because it suggests one of two things. Either the people of Kynes Grove are so used to danger that even something like this doesn't fully register, or they simply don't have the capacity to process. Neither option is particularly comforting. The environment reinforces this feeling in subtle ways. The volcanic terrain, the constant heat rising from the ground, the muted colours. It all creates a backdrop that feels unstable, even when nothing is actively happening. There's no sense of calm in Kynes Grove, just a kind of baseline tension that never fully disappears. It's not dramatic, it's persistent. And that persistence mirrors the town's relationship with the events that took place there. Nothing explodes into chaos, nothing visibly collapses, everything just continues, layered on top of what came before, without fully addressing it. Even the layout of the town contributes to this. It's small, open, with little separation between its parts. There's nowhere for things to hide, no complex structure to explore. Everything is visible, everything is exposed. And yet, despite that openness, it still feels like something is missing. Some acknowledgement, some reaction, some shift that would make the place feel grounded in what happened there. But it never comes, and that absence lingers. Kynes Grove also stands out because of how early it appears in the main story. For many players, this is one of the first major moments where the scale of the dragon threat becomes clear, other than Helgen. It's a turning point, not just narratively but thematically. It tells you that this isn't a series of isolated encounters. It's a larger pattern, something that will continue to unfold across the world. And yet, the town where that realization happens doesn't carry the weight forward. It remains small, it remains quiet, it remains unchanged. That contrast between what the player experiences and what the world reflects is what makes Kynes Grove so uniquely unsettling. It's not that the town is dangerous in the traditional sense, it's that it feels disconnected from the significance of what happened within it. And that disconnect raises a subtle, lingering question. If something this important can happen here and leave so little visible impact, what else might be happening in Skyrim that no one else is fully acknowledging? That question extends beyond Kynes Grove itself. It turns the town into a kind of symbol, a place that represents the gap between events and perception, between reality and response. It suggests that the world of Skyrim doesn't always process its own dangers in a way that feels complete. And that idea is far more unsettling than any single event. When you start comparing Kynes Grove to other unsettling towns in Skyrim, what stands out isn't what it has, but what it lacks. Morthal builds its unease through atmosphere, a constant sense that something is wrong beneath the surface. Dawnstar creates discomfort through intrusion, where people are actively being affected by something they can't escape. Roekstead hides its strangeness behind perfection, leaving you to question what's really sustaining it. Karth Wasteland feels unstable because of external pressure, always on the edge of being overtaken by something stronger. Kynes Grove doesn't follow any of those patterns. It doesn't hide something, it doesn't build tension slowly. It doesn't really suggest deeper secrets waiting to be uncovered. Instead, it shows you something massive, something undeniable, and then nothing follows. That's what separates it. Where other towns make you uneasy because of what you don't know, Kynes Grove unsettles you because of what you do know, and how little that knowledge seems to matter to the place itself. This becomes even clearer when you look at the NPCs. Idra and Roggy Knotbeard, who represent the everyday life of Kynes Grove. Idra runs the local inn, maintaining a sense of normalcy that feels almost forced when you consider what happens just outside of the town. There's no dramatic shift in her behaviour, no lingering fear or urgency in how she speaks. She carries on, grounded in routine, as if the extraordinary event that occurred nearby never truly disrupted that rhythm. Roggy, meanwhile, reflects a different side of that same idea, a miner defined more by his habits than any larger awareness. He embodies the kind of person who doesn't engage with the bigger picture. His world is small, focused on work, drink, and survival. And that narrow focus creates a kind of insulation from the larger events unfolding around him. It's not that he's unaware, it's that the awareness doesn't translate into action or change. And that's the pattern across the town. The NPCs don't react in ways that match the scale of what happened. They acknowledge at most, but they don't transform. Compared to someone like Jarl Idgrod in Morthal, who actively reflects the strange nature of her environment, or Erender in Dawnstar, who directly engages with the source of the town's suffering, Kynes Grove's residents feel detached, not ignorant, but disconnected. They exist alongside something significant without fully integrating it into their understanding of the world. That disconnect is what gives the town its identity, because it creates a gap between event and reaction, between experience and meaning. And that gap is where the unease lives, because it implies that even the most significant moments can be absorbed, normalised, and ultimately overlooked. Kynes Grove doesn't need mystery or hidden lore, or supernatural ambiguity to feel unsettling. It just needs that one event. And the way everything continues afterwards as if it didn't matter as much as it should have. That's what lingers, not the dragon, not the battle, but the silence that follows. and the realization that sometimes the most unsettling places in Skyrim aren't the ones where something is happening, but the ones where something already happened, and no one seems to fully react to it. You don't walk into Skull Village and feel peace. You walk in and feel like something has already gone wrong. Not in an obvious chaotic way at first, but in a way that immediately feels off. The village is too quiet, too empty, too still for a place that's supposed to be lived in. And then you notice the people who are there. They're not really present. They're working, moving, repeating the same actions over and over again. But there's no awareness behind it. No reaction to you, no curiosity, no acknowledgement. Just motion without thought. It doesn't feel like a village functioning. It feels like a village being controlled. And that's exactly what's happening. Mirak's influence has taken hold of Skull Village, and it doesn't show itself through destruction or open violence. It shows itself through removal. The removal of will, of identity, of presence. The villagers aren't fighting, they aren't resisting, they've already lost. They've been reduced to something closer to tools than people, locked in repetitive labour that serves a purpose they don't understand. That's what makes it so unsettling. It's not chaos in the traditional sense, it's control, and it's quiet. The repetition is the most disturbing part. You can stand there and watch them, and nothing changes. They don't break routine, don't react, don't stop. It creates this trance-like atmosphere where time feels stuck, like the village is caught in a loop it can't escape. And because there are so few people there, that repetition becomes even more noticeable. The emptiness around them amplifies it. This isn't a thriving community, it's what's left of one. Most of the skull are gone, taken to work on the stones, pulled out of the village and into Mirak's control elsewhere. What remains feels like a shell, a fragment of something that used to be whole. Buildings stand but feel underused. Spaces exist but isn't filled. It's not abandoned, but it's close enough that the difference barely matters. That emptiness creates a different kind of unease than places like Morthal or Dawnstar. Those towns feel wrong because something is happening beneath the surface. Skull Village feels wrong because something has already taken over the surface and left everyone to leave. There's no mystery to uncover in the moment. You're looking directly at the result. And the few NPCs who aren't under control only make it worse, because they are aware. They see what's happening, they understand it, and they obviously can't stop it. That contrast between those who are trapped in the trance and those who are forced to watch it adds another layer to the discomfort. It turns the village into something almost surreal, half alive, half gone. And then there's the psychological aspect of Mirak's control itself. This isn't just mind control, it's domination tied to knowledge, to power, to something beyond normal understanding. It connects back to Hermaeus Mora, to the idea of forbidden knowledge and the cost of it. The Skull reject that kind of knowledge, build their entire culture around avoiding it, and yet here it is, overriding them completely. That contradiction hits hard, because it shows that their traditions, their resistance, weren't enough. Whatever protection they believed they had, it failed. And that failure lingers in the atmosphere of the village. Even once the control is broken, even once the villagers return to themselves, that initial impression doesn't fully go away. You've already seen what the village looks like when something takes hold of it. You've seen how quickly identity can disappear, how easily routine can replace thought, how community can be reduced to movement without meaning. And that's what sticks. Not just that Skull Village was controlled, but how quietly and quickly it happened. No battle, no warning, just a shift, and suddenly the village isn't a village anymore, it's something else. When a community operates with that level of consistency, you start to wonder what happens to anything that doesn't fit. What happens to doubt, to disagreement, to ideas that fall outside the framework they've built? The game doesn't show you those answers directly, but the absence of those elements become noticeable in itself. Even though the village is under constant threat from Mirak, there's no visible tension within the village. No disagreement, no deviation, just alignment. And over time, that alignment starts to feel less like harmony and more like restriction. The isolation of Skull Village amplifies this even further. Unlike other remote settlements in Skyrim, which still feel connected to trade routes, political structures, or nearby regions. The Skull exists in near total separation. The northern part of this island is harsh, cold, and difficult to navigate, with little incentive for outsiders to travel there unless they have a specific reason and a boat. And because of that, the village doesn't just feel remote, it's basically just sealed off. Not just physically, but culturally as well. The Skull don't adapt to the outside world, they resist it. Their beliefs are built around preservation, around maintaining a balance that they see as essential. But that preservation comes at a cost. It limits interaction, limits growth, limits exposure to anything beyond what they already know. And while that might protect them from certain dangers, it also creates a kind of stagnation. The village doesn't evolve, it maintains. And that maintenance becomes its defining trait. Even the environment reinforces this. The snow, the cold, the stillness. They don't just surround the village, they shape it. Movement feels slower, quieter, more deliberate. There's no sense of urgency, no sense of change. Everything exists in a kind of suspended state, where time feels like it's passing differently, not frozen, but steady in a way that never shifts. That steadiness might seem peaceful at first, but over time it starts to feel limiting, like the village isn't just resisting change, it's preventing it entirely. And that leads into another unsettling aspect of Skull Village, its emptiness. Not emptiness in the sense of being abandoned, but in how little there is beyond the surface. The population is small with the people who are still there. The buildings are very minimal, and the range of interaction is narrow. There's no sense of expansion, no indication that the village was growing or ever developing. It feels complete, but in a way that leaves no room for anything else. You walk through it, and you see everything there is to see. There's nothing hidden, nothing waiting to be discovered other than the control of Mirak. Skull Village doesn't rely on fear or mystery or visible danger to create unease. It does it through structure, through repetition, through the quiet removal of variation. It presents a version of stability that feels almost perfect, and then makes you question what had to be removed to achieve it. Because in a world as chaotic and unpredictable as Skyrim, a place that remains that consistent, that controlled, that unchanged, doesn't just feel different, it feels unnatural. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to ignore that feeling, until eventually the calm stops feeling comforting and starts feeling like something you don't fully understand, something you can observe but never quite be part of it. When you look across all these towns, what really stands out is that none of them are unsettling for the same reason. And that's what makes Skyrim so effective at creating discomfort. It's not just about danger, it's about how each place feels, and more importantly, why it feels that way. Morthal unsettles you through atmosphere, a constant sense that something is wrong even when nothing is happening. Dawnstar works through intrusion, where people are slowly worn down by something they can't escape. Roekstead hides its unease behind perfection, leaving you questioning what it costs to get there. Karth Waston shows you vulnerability, a town that can be controlled or destroyed by forces far beyond it. Kynes Grove proves that even the biggest events can be ignored, normalised, and left behind in a way that doesn't feel right. And then Skull Village takes all of that and strips it down even further. It shows you what happens when control is absolute, when a place doesn't just feel wrong, but becomes something else entirely. A village where people are still there, but not really present, where identity disappears and all that's left is repetition. And that's what really ties all these places together. It's not just that they're dangerous, it's that they take something familiar, a town, a community, a place that should feel safe, and twist it in a way that feels just slightly off. Sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious, but always enough to stay with you. Because in Skyrim, the most unsettling places aren't the ones filled with enemies. They're the ones that make you question what you're actually looking at.